Turning to some news that has broken since we've been on the air, Axios reporting that former director of the FBI, Jim Comey, has been subpoenaed in a wide-ranging grand conspiracy case against the ex-officials who investigated and some who would go on to prosecute Donald Trump. That's according to two sources with knowledge of that situation. The subpoena for Jim Comey was reportedly issued last week and relates to his alleged role in the drafting of a January 2017 intelligence community assessment concerning Russia's election interference that favored Donald Trump. This so-called grand conspiracy case is based in the Southern District of Florida, and it relies on the belief that officials who worked for President Barack Obama and later Joe Biden broke the law back then before they knew who would win the 2016 election to try to undermine Donald Trump from his 2016 election through his federal indictments in 2023. It sounds bat bleep crazy, but it's really happening. I want to bring in New York Times Justice Department reporter Glenn Thrush. He's reported extensively on the Trump administration's retribution efforts, as well as the many years of investigations into Russian interference. Also joining us, former top DOJ official, general counsel, and former general counsel for the FBI, our legal analyst Andrew Weissmann, who was many moons ago, many lifetimes ago on the Mueller investigation, which was the post-2016 investigation into whether Donald Trump's campaign had any ties to Russia. This all sounds like a soap opera, and it sounds crazy, but I just want to put before both of you what we're learning today and what we had as background and ask you to tell us what this means. Again, this is from Axios. Andrew Weissmann, who's reporting former FBI Director Jim Comey has been subpoenaed in the wide-ranging conspiracy case against the ex-officials who investigated and prosecuted Trump. Tell me what this means. And we should make clear this is totally separate from the Trump administration's efforts to indict him in the Eastern District of Virginia. That was where Lindsay Halligan went in because the career officials wouldn't. This is a different investigation based in Florida with the perception, at least, of friendlier jurors and friendlier judges.
So there's substance to talk about and there's procedure to talk about. Substantively, it's a little bit odd because many people will remember that James Comey, if you're looking at him in connection with his purportedly trying to undermine Donald Trump's 2016 bid for the presidency, many people will be going, what are you talking about? They can remember the events of October, let alone in July of that year when Jim Comey did things that dramatically hurt Donald Trump's opponent, Hillary Clinton, both in July when he gave a press conference and denigrated her, and then when he announced in October that he was reopening the investigation. So that's the same person who, at least if the reporting is correct, is supposed to be engaged in a conspiracy to undermine Donald Trump. There also, as you have reported over and over again, Nicole, there have been investigations into this by the Inspector General and by John Durham himself, and nothing was found. In fact, they cleared him of, and sort of the whole time period of any sort of wrongdoing in terms of any sort of intentional misconduct that was engaged in to hurt Donald Trump. So that's sort of substantively. Procedurally, it's quite odd because even though this is apparently a very different investigation than the one in Virginia, remember the government is appealing the dismissal of the Comey indictment in Virginia, and so that is pending. And so you do not, under DOJ policy, or at least under DOJ policy up till today, you don't subpoena somebody who is actually you are targeting in a criminal case. He has every right in that situation to not only not be subpoenaed under DOJ policy, but he would have every right to assert the Fifth Amendment because the Department of Justice is trying to prosecute him and to get that case reinvigorated. So it's very, very odd. I have never seen that where you subpoena somebody who is a target in maybe one, if not two, criminal cases. That sort of violates DOJ policy. There's also just a lot of issues about why it is in Florida, the statute of limitations having run because we're talking about something in 2016 that it's going to be very hard to sort of bootstrap into being some sort of timely investigation. So there are lots of procedural issues as well as substantive issues here if this reporting is accurate.
So the conduct that is reportedly under scrutiny, Glenn, is about the intelligence community assessment concerning Russia's election interference, that Russia favored Trump. I believe Russia has said publicly, standing next to Donald Trump, that it and he, Vladimir Putin, favored Trump. The other piece that I think Andrew's getting at is that John Durham investigated the intelligence community's conduct in the Steele dossier. That resulted in 0 successful prosecutions, spent millions of dollars, went on longer than the Mueller probe. Horowitz, who was the inspector general at DOJ, looked at Comey's role in that specifically. And Jim Jordan has been holding hearings all over the country investigating these things for the better part of 9 years. What is newly under investigation, or are there simply new investigators?
It's not clear. I should say we haven't confirmed the latest Axios report, but it's very consistent with what we've heard in the past and what we've reported in the past, which is the issuance of a dozen subpoenas with regard to the investigation into that intelligence assessment. The principal target of this is John Brennan, who is a former administration official. And the saga of this is quite remarkable in and of itself. The initial investigation was tasked to the Trump-appointed U.S. attorney in eastern Pennsylvania. As we have reported, it appears he wanted nothing to do with this. And Todd Blanche, Pam Bondi's number 2 at the Department of Justice, shipped this down to Jason Quinones, who is responsible for the investigation into the quote-unquote grand conspiracy. What is the grand conspiracy? Hard to say. It's a notion of Donald Trump. It's this fantastical idea that there was a broad conspiracy by all these officials to destroy Donald Trump through various means, but it seems to have focused more squarely on this intelligence assessment and the use of the Steele dossier. It gets very, very complicated, and also, as Andrew said, the 5-year statute of limitations has run out, and again, apart from the fact that Eileen Cannon, the judge who essentially let Trump slide on the Miami documents, on the Mar-a-Lago documents case, it's her jurisdiction. It's impossible to figure out why it's down there. So the bottom line is this seems to be a mashup of 2 of Donald Trump's obsessions, putting Jim Comey in court in one way or the other, who he regards as an enemy, and investigating this very, very broad conspiracy that Trump sees as seeking to undermine him.